we're going to start with our project box that's included in the kit. This project box is going to turn into our remote control for our sea perch. So what you want to do is locate where you're going to want to put the switches for the forward and reverse, and then up and down on the box. Once you get a rough idea on where you want to put them, go ahead and lay out those locations on the box. You can use the marker directly onto the box, which will show, or take a piece of masking tape, place it over the box, and lay out your locations. So in my case, I'm going to lay my thumbs over. That looks like a good place. And I'll put one there. And I'll put one there. And then I'll put the two holes for my up and down controller on the side of the panel. I'll go ahead and put one here and one here. Okay, and those are the holes that we'll be putting the switches into. Now the other thing that we'll need in the box is we'll need to run the power lines into the box and our control wire into the box. So we'll go ahead and put a single hole on both sides. In order to run those cables. Okay. And then using our drill, again, we'll start with a small hole and then we'll open it up to a larger hole. As you lay this out, you want to take a look at the switches that come with it and make sure that you have enough room to put the switches in. If you end up having to move switches later in the process, that's okay. There's no reason you can't have plenty of extra holes. Now that we have our holes complete, what we'll want to do is disassemble each of the switches. Each of the switches will have two nuts, so make sure you get both. Okay. And we're going to install the switches backwards. So we'll go ahead and install all four of our switches, and then they'll be ready for us to do the soldering. And holding them in, we'll only use one nut since we're only doing this temporarily. Now, the reason we do this is so that when we're doing the soldering, we can do the soldering out in the open rather than trying to work down inside our enclosure. Later, when we're all done, we'll take them all apart and put them out the proper ways. On the red switches, make sure they're both facing the same way with the writing on the switch. That will help when we do our soldering later. Our next step is to put together our power cable that we'll use to connect our controller and everything to the batteries. In the kit, we have some gold and silver speaker wire. We'll start by splitting apart the two sections. Usually just takes a good fingernail to split them apart. And we're going to split them apart for about a foot. So we have two individual strands. The next thing we're going to need is the fuse holder that's provided in the kit. Now the fuse holder, when put together, goes like that. And what we'll need to do is cut the wire so that you now have the fuse in the middle of the wire. Some of the kits may already have this cut. If it's not cut, go ahead and cut it. Otherwise, this is how you need to have it. Now what you want to do is take the gold strand and lay your fuse wire alongside. Do you know what that length is? Go ahead and cut the gold wire about a ½ inch short of the full length. This will allow us to insert the fuse assembly onto this wire and then have both ends still be the same length. Okay. Using the wire strippers, we will strip a ½ inch off of each of these. And we can do both of the wires on the speaker wire, all again for about a ½ inch. get these two ready to be soldered together, go ahead and twist two pieces of wire together. And those are now ready to be soldered. As we're getting ready to solder, a few things to keep in mind. The soldering iron is hot enough to do all the soldering. You don't have to worry about, is it hot enough, is it going to work? Just have to give it enough time to do its job. You don't want to push it, you don't want to rush it, and it will happen very gently and very nicely. As we go through this and we do the switches and some of the other fine contacts, you'll find that a light hand is much better than a heavy hand with a soldering iron. Okay? So we'll go ahead and we have our first wire set up in the holders here. You can use a set of holders like this, or you can lay it on a table, whatever works best to hold things in place. If you have a spare person, they can hold the two ends. Just make sure you keep everyone else's fingers away from the actual hot parts. Remember that the heat will travel up the wires a bit. So if you're going to have someone help hold, make sure they're far enough away that they're not going to get too warm. Okay. So what we'll do, put the soldering iron up against our joint, let it warm up a little bit. We'll just place the solder right next to it. And as it gets hot, it will just flow right into the wire. And all you need is enough solder to make the wire silver. You don't have to get blobbed, just enough that everything's silver. Once that cools down, okay, there's your first completed soldering joint. Again, not too much solder, not too much heat. We managed to do it without melting the plastic on either side of the wire, which is one of the goals. So we'll go ahead with that. So the next thing, go ahead and take this out of our handy dandy holder, is we're going to put our connectors for connecting to the batteries on the other end of both our power wire and then the silver wire here. And to help us do that, we're going to do what's called tinning the wires. To tin the wires, we're basically going to just put solder on the wires, which will keep them stiff as well as keep all the strands together. Same process, put the iron on the wire and let the solder flow through it. And we'll do that for the other one. Okay. Now that those are tinned, make sure you take your rubber boots and put them on before you put the clips on. Now that we have our rubber gator boots on, we'll take each one of these alligator clips and feed the wire up and then around the screw on each of the clips. Now, because we tinned the wire is going to be pretty stiff as we do that, which will help hold it in place. You can use a pair of the pliers to help shape it, and then go ahead and tighten the screw. Now at this point, that's all that needs to be done to secure that wire to the clip. If you feel like you can add some solder to that, but it's not needed, and it's kind of hard with these big metal clips. Then go ahead and slide the boot over. We have our first connector done. Go ahead and do the second with the power. Okay, now that we have the battery end of the power cable together, we're going to go ahead and wire up the power cables for inside of our control box. For this part, we're going to need the red and black wires that are in our kits. What we'll want to do is cut them each in half, not once, but twice, giving us 4 black wires and 4 red wires. Now what we'll want to do is strip the wire on each end of each of those wires, 1/2 inch on one side, 1/4 inch on the other, and go ahead and do that for all 8 of these wires. If during your stripping of the wires you accidentally cut them or break too many strands, there's plenty of length left here, so feel free to just cut it off and restrip them. Okay, and our last wire here. Okay, so now we're going to take the 4 black wires, the longer stripped ends that we did, place them all together, and twist all their ends together, bringing those into one group. Okay, we'll do the same with the reds. Okay. And we'll take the other end that we did not put the connectors on of our speaker wire. Again, we'll split that apart. Only need to strip it apart about 2 inches. Take a 1/2 inch off of each of those. Okay. And then, if you remember, we put the fuse and red binder clip on the gold wire, so we'll go ahead and twist together the red wires with the gold. And then we'll put the black wires on the silver, and then we will solder those together. Now, the more wires we have in one of our soldering joints, take a little bit more time for them to get up to temperature. But again, all it takes is enough to hold everything together, stop it from falling apart. Now that we have those joints soldered, we're going to take a little of the electrical tape, just tape over each of these. The solder will hold them together. The tape is more to keep the wires from touching each other and causing a short circuit in the box.